Peter Blackwood, coordinator of the Uniting Church Icon Schools. This is a teaching video for members of the school attending our October classes online, and if you are viewing from beyond this little community, you are very welcome, and I'd love to read any comments that you have about this lesson. This video is about varnishing icons. In our icon schools, the favoured method has been spray varnish. Several thin coats applied from about 30 centimetres, that's about a foot. I'm not suggesting that those who have found success with this method should change. Just to say, this is about applying varnish with a paintbrush. But first, why varnish? Well, one, to protect the paint from UV light, and that causes fading. Secondly, to protect egg tempera paint from little beasties that like eating some pigments. And thirdly, to give a deeper colour saturation to the paint. Some years ago, I watched Philip Davidoff varnish an icon. He had painted the icon 12 months earlier, so the paint was well dried. He used copal varnish, provided by a company called Bourgeois, to which he added pure turpentine and a few drops of cobalt dryer. Philip also produced a video for YouTube that I found very helpful. The choice of copal was advised by art conservators in St. Petersburg, all up some pretty good credentials for varnishing my own icons. Over subsequent years, I have used copal varnish provided by the Gold Leaf factory in Melbourne, and I have been very happy with the results. Mine are working icons, that is to say, they're often exhibited and therefore need robust protection for being handled and packed and transported. Then disaster struck. The worldwide supply of prepared copal varnish dried up. Not a drop to be had for love or money. What to do? What about Damer, another natural varnish used by artists through the ages? Aidan Hart prefers Damer to copal, he says in his book. So I tried it. It had mixed success, but it gives a very high gloss. My main problem was its lack of consistency across all pigments. Another contender for finishing icons that I tried was Retouch Varnish. This is a protection used by oil paint artists to give temporary gloss and protection to recently completed work that is not yet fully dried. It can breathe. So I tried this on an icon and found that it was not so consistent on egg tempera. Tended to be a bit streaky. And incidentally, shellac, which also breathes, is recommended for giving temporary protection for icons that have not had 6 to 12 months to fully dry. When I found a satin varnish produced by Bourgeois and sold by the Gold Leaf factory, I thought I'd give it a go. Remember, this was the same company that made the copal varnish that worked so well. And I bought it and tried it out on an icon that had been a real problem to me with other varnishes that I'd tried before. It should be noted that these varnishes are removable. Turpentine successfully removed the problem varnishes, and then I tried the satin varnish. It took 3 coats over 3 days, but the end result is satisfactory. Another thing I experimented with was the manner of applying the varnish. Philip Davidoff applied copal with a smallish brush and worked and reworked the surface, sometimes coming back to go over areas that had gone flat about 20 minutes later. Watching videos of artists and art restorers applying Damar varnish, I noticed that they used a wider brush, at least 25 millimeters, that is about an inch, and applied the product in straight, even single swipe strokes across the width of the paintings. And I've used this method with the Satin varnish. Reworking it makes a mess, as does reworking Damar. I think this is because it is not very viscous and it dries quite quickly. So let me show you what I have learned by varnishing an icon of St. Matthew that I painted over 6 months ago. So first of all, I am giving this bottle of Satin varnish a jolly good shake. Because it does tend to settle in the bottom. This kind of indicates that it's a good product, because that's what other good natural products do. Don't actually know what the varnish is made of. I can't find any ingredients anywhere. But because I'm using a brush that is wider than the neck of the bottle, I'm decanting just a little into this ceramic bowl. Now I'm doing this operation outside. It's not very smelly, but all of these varnishes, it's advised to do them in a well ventilated area, and what better ventilation can you have than outside? So I'm applying this with the 1-inch brush. I do find that the first loading of the brush is doesn't spread as well. It takes a couple of loadings really to get the brush going, strangely. But I'm just doing it across in strips, just overlapping slightly on the one before. And the reason that I'm putting my head in the way like that is so that I can actually see where the varnish is going. I'm doing it so that I can get some light coming off the surface, and I can see the work that I'm doing much better that way. It's also another advantage of doing this operation outside, plenty of light. I have done some of the test runs in my shed, which doesn't have much light, and so I do have a strong light quite close to the panel and playing off it so that I can see from the glare from the light how I'm going. These little bits of hair from the brush, I suppose it's a cheap brush, but I have seen others who do this professionally on their YouTube videos coming up with the same problems of hair coming off their brushes, having to just pick it off. It is also a good thing that this is not a windy day outside. It's really important that it's a dust-free environment. One of the things that I did before I started was to just check the surface to see that there was nothing on it that would get stuck in this sticky varnish. These layers are quite thin, that is, I'm loading the brush but wiping it off on the side of the little jar. Another rotten little bit. The tiny little specks that just appear, but they have to be got rid of straight away. So one of the things that happens with this varnishing process is that you as you're going, as it does dry quite quickly, and you can see some areas that have dried that are quite flat. Now this is, as this is suggested, a satin finish. It's not a high gloss, but it's not matte either. And if you can see matte areas, that is no glare, then it has dried and soaked in somehow, I think. And that's not the result we want. So I've gone over, you can also get some idea. Now I'm being very careful not to go back up top too often to rework, because already that will have started to dry, and if the new varnish goes on, it'll start to, I don't know, sort of rework what's gone underneath and just make it into a mess. So I'm wanting to get another glance on this. Just I can see that there's a little corner that just needed a bit of a touch, and just catch the light to see that I've covered the whole area. It looks okay at this stage. So now, in case there are things flying around that are likely to land on this while it is wet, cover it up. Lesson learnt the hard way. Wash the brush, or put the surplus varnish back into the jar, and wash the brush in turpentine. Job done, at least for the first coat. We now wait for it to dry. Okay, so this is pretty much the same process, the same afternoon. Thought I'd take a chance on doing it this soon. It is touch dry. I would have hoped to have done it the next day, but tomorrow's weather isn't going to be so bright, so I think we're going to be okay to do this today. Again, shake the bottle, decant a little into the little ceramic receptacle. Note this time I've got some paper ready to fix stuff up in case I need to wipe something. I didn't have it this morning, but I thought, oh dear, I should have done that. But I'm ready this afternoon, and then didn't need it. Again, exactly the same process. Load the brush, wipe it off. Don't overwork, just smooth out the transition between the two brush strokes. Tiny bit of overlap. Be a bit careful going back, it's drying already, so don't do that too often. Now I'm not leaning down to get the glare, because I can see it quite clearly from my upright position, and you can kind of see it from the camera angle too. Tiny little smudge got on there. The cardboard covering worked well. There was nothing dropped on the surface, and it may have helped because it's a sunny day and having that cover on, it may have, while it didn't get movement of air across it to help dry, the sun on the cardboard would have warmed up the surface, and that may well have helped the drying. It's interesting that going across the clothing area, it feels much smoother already. That paint, it's all pretty much titanium grey, unbleached titanium, and titanium white. So it's worked quite well. Clean up the ceramic bowl and clean off the brush, and we won't really know until perhaps later today or even tomorrow whether that was the last coat. We'll see. But all cleaned up. Cover it up again, and that's job done. Well, this experiment with satin varnish did need more coats. While you weren't looking, I applied 2 more coats, so that's 4 coats altogether to get an even covering. For me, an even covering means the same luster across the whole panel. So, am I happy with the result? Well, yes and no. Unfortunately, it did leave brush marks, or at least a certain texture to the surface. I could put a positive spin on that and say that it adds to the character of the painting. When I can get to the shops in person instead of buying online, I will try a brush that has softer bristles than the one that I used this time. So that's the no answer. On the yes side, this icon is now well protected. It is safe to touch it without damaging the paint. Indeed, this could be wiped down with a damp cloth quite safely. Happy about that. Will it change colour over the years? It's often said that varnishes yellow in time, some more than others. I don't know what might happen to Lafont et Bourgeois' satin varnish. It may age, and I don't think I will be around to notice in 20 to 30 years. If I am, and I notice a change, I promise to make another video on this subject. Thanks for watching. Love to get your comments. I don't claim to have all the answers. This has just been an experiment, and I'm very open to other people's expertise and advice.